"You don't deserve that ring. You never worked for it," my aunt said, pulling it from my hand at the funeral. I said nothing. A month later, the appraiser called her. "This is a replica." The air in the reception hall was thick and cloying, smelling of lilies and baked ham. It was the smell of performative grief, a scent I was quickly learning to despise. People moved in slow, murmuring clusters, their dark clothes absorbing the weak afternoon light that filtered through the tall, church-like windows. I stood alone by a table laden with food no one was touching, my hand wrapped around a glass of ice water that was doing nothing to cool the frozen block in my chest. My mother was gone. The thought was still abstract, a sentence I could say but not comprehend. It had only been 3 days since she'd passed, a week since she'd pressed her ring into my palm, her own fingers skeletal and cool. "For you, my love," she had whispered, her voice a dry rustle of leaves. "Don't ever let anyone make you feel you don't deserve it." And now, here was Aunt Carol, making a beeline for me through the sad, polite crowd. She was my father's sister, a woman sculpted from sharp angles and expensive fabrics. My mother had always called her the Vulture, but only in private, with a wry, tired smile. Today, Carol was playing the part of the bereaved sister-in-law to perfection, her face a carefully constructed mask of sorrow. Her eyes, however, were sharp and bright, scanning, calculating. They weren't looking at my face. They were fixed on my left hand, where my mother's ring sat. It was a deep cornflower blue sapphire, an heirloom from my great-grandmother, surrounded by a halo of small, brilliant diamonds. It felt heavy on my finger, a weight of love and legacy. "Clara, darling," she said, her voice a low, sympathetic purr that made the hairs on my arms stand up. She took my free hand, her own fingers surprisingly strong, her nails immaculate. "How are you holding up? It's just so devastating. Your mother was such a presence." The pause was infinitesimal, but I heard it. It was the space where she'd bitten back a dozen other words. Difficult, stubborn, proud. "I'm getting through," I managed, the words feeling like sand in my mouth. I wanted to be left alone. I wanted to be at home, in my mother's quiet house, surrounded by her things, by the ghost of her. I did not want to be here, making small talk with a woman my mother had tolerated with the weary grace of a monarch dealing with a troublesome courtier. Carol's eyes flicked down to my hand again, the one holding the glass. "That was your mother's, wasn't it?" she asked, her voice losing a fraction of its syrupy sweetness. She gestured with her chin toward the ring. "The family sapphire. It's magnificent." "Yes," I said simply. "She gave it to me." A strange expression tightened the corners of her mouth. It was a flicker of something raw and ugly, gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a look of pained understanding. "Oh, Clara." Of course she did. In her final days, people aren't always thinking clearly. Grief, the medication, it can make them do things, promise things that aren't quite right. I stared at her, the ice in my chest beginning to fracture. "She was perfectly clear, Carol. She wanted me to have it." "Of course she did, sweetie," Carol cooed, patting my hand, but her grip was tightening. "It's just that, a piece like that, it's not just a ring, it's a legacy. It belongs to the Vance family, to the women who have earned their place in it." She finally looked me in the eye, and the pretense of sympathy was gone, replaced by a cold, hard certainty. "You don't deserve that ring," she said, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "You never worked for it. You haven't built a family, a home. You're just a girl. Your mother should have given it to me. I'm the matriarch now." The audacity of it was like a physical blow. It knocked the air from my lungs. I was frozen, not by fear, but by a level of shock so profound it shut down my entire operating system. I saw her hand move towards mine. I felt her fingers, cold and firm, close around my knuckle. I watched, as if from a great distance, as she began to slide the ring off my finger. Part of my brain was screaming, a silent, primal shriek. "Stop her! Do something! Say something!" But I was paralyzed, trapped in the amber of my own grief and disbelief. The ring was a little tight, and for a horrible second, I thought it wouldn't come off, that she would break my finger trying. But she twisted it, her movements practiced and efficient, and it slid free. She held it in her palm for a moment, a triumphant glint in her eye. She curled her fingers around it, making a fist. "This is for the best," she said, her voice returning to its normal, controlled tone. "We'll keep it safe, for the family." She gave my now empty hand a final, condescending pat. "You just focus on getting better, dear." And then she turned and walked away, melting back into the crowd of mourners, leaving me standing there, my hand cold and bare, the imprint of the band still visible on my skin. I said nothing. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just stood there, the world tilting on its axis, my mother's last words echoing in my head. "Don't ever let anyone make you feel you don't deserve it." I had failed her in less than a week. The shame was a hot, choking tide, and for the first time since she died, a single, scalding tear traced a path down my cheek. The month that followed was a gray fog. I moved through the motions of a life that no longer felt like my own. I sorted through my mother's clothes, the scent of her perfume clinging to the fabric, each garment a fresh stab of pain. I paid bills, canceled subscriptions, and spoke to a litany of officials in the flat, detached voice of someone reporting a traffic accident. The family called, of course, not Carol. She was conspicuously silent. But other relatives called, my father's cousins, my other aunts. Their conversations were stilted, full of awkward pauses. They'd ask how I was, and before I could answer, they would launch into a defense of Carol. "Carol is just trying to protect the family heirlooms," one cousin told me, her voice oozing with false reason. "You know how traditional she is. She thinks things should be passed down in a certain way." Another said, "She's worried about you, Clara, all alone in that big house. She thinks a valuable piece like that might be a target. It was a coordinated campaign of gaslighting, and I was too exhausted to fight it. I just made non-committal noises and got off the phone as quickly as possible. The bareness of my finger was a constant, throbbing reminder of my weakness, of the moment I had stood by and let her take a piece of my mother from me. The anger was there, buried deep beneath a thick, heavy blanket of grief. Sometimes I would feel it stir, a hot, molten thing in the pit of my stomach, but then a wave of sorrow would wash over it, and I would be left feeling nothing but empty and tired. I told myself it was just a thing, a material object, that my mother's love wasn't contained in a piece of metal and stone, but it was a lie. It was the last thing she had touched and given to me. It was a symbol of her fight, her resilience, her love for me, and I had let it go. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon, my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, a local business. I almost ignored it, but for some reason, I answered. Hello? Yes, hello? Is this Clara Vance? A man's voice asked. It was brisk and professional. Yes, this is she. My name is Mr. Miller, from Miller & Sons Jewelers. I'm calling about the sapphire ring brought in for appraisal by a Carol Vance. She left your number as a secondary contact in case she was unreachable. My blood ran cold. My hand tightened on the phone. Why would she get it appraised so quickly? And why would she leave my number? It was a power play, another little twist of the knife to make sure I knew she was treating it as her own property. I decided to play dumb. A tactic I was learning was invaluable when dealing with my family. Oh, right, the ring. Is there a problem? A problem? No, not at all, he said cheerfully. The appraisal is complete. I just had to give her the bad news, and I wanted to make sure the message was passed along. Sometimes clients get emotional and don't hear all the details. Bad news? I asked, my heart starting to beat a little faster. Well, yes, it's a masterful replica, I have to give them that. The setting is sterling silver, well crafted, but the main stone is glass, and the surrounding stones are high-grade cubic zirconia. From a distance, it's a dead ringer for a high-value Burmese sapphire, but under the loupe, it's quite clear. It's worth a few $100s tops, mostly for the silver weight and the craftsmanship. He paused, and I could hear the faint smile in his voice. She was not pleased. Insisted I must be mistaken. I assured her, our gemologists are the best in the state. There is no mistake. I sank down into the nearest chair. The phone pressed hard against my ear. The room seemed to expand and contract around me. A replica. My mother's ring was a replica, but that was impossible. I remembered its weight, the way the light caught in the facets of the sapphire, the cold, hard reality of it. Are you there, Miss Vance? Mr. Miller asked, a hint of concern in his voice. Yes, I'm here, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Thank you for letting me know. I'll make sure she gets the message. Very good. Have a nice day. He hung up. I sat in the silent kitchen, the receiver still in my hand. The silence was absolute, and in that silence, a single, crystalline thought formed. My mother knew. She knew Carol. She had anticipated this. This wasn't an insult from beyond the grave. It was a message. It was a chess move. My mother had been playing a long game, and the board had just been revealed to me. The heavy blanket of grief began to lift, burned away by the heat of a rage so pure and so clear, it was almost exhilarating. The numbness receded, replaced by a cold, sharp focus. This was not over. This was just beginning. My first call was to my Uncle Robert. He was my mother's younger brother, a quiet, steady man who worked as a high school history teacher. He and my mother had been incredibly close, united by a shared dry wit and a clear-eyed view of the world, including the more difficult members of their extended family. He picked up on the second ring. Clara, is everything all right? He sounded worried. I hadn't been calling people back much. Uncle Robert, I said, and my voice was stronger than it had been in a month. I need to tell you something. I told him everything. The scene at the funeral, Carol's words, her taking the ring. I confessed my shame at my own inaction. Then I told him about the call from the appraiser. I relayed the conversation word for word. For a long moment after I finished, there was only silence on the other end of the line. I held my breath. Then I heard it, a low chuckle. It grew into a full, warm laugh. Oh, Eleanor, he said, and I could hear the love and admiration in his voice. You magnificent, stubborn woman. He laughed again. That sounds exactly like something your mother would do. She always knew who Carol was, down to the marrow of her bones. She saw this coming, Clara, a mile away. So you think she did it on purpose? Had a copy made? I would bet my pension on it, he said, his voice turning serious again. Your mother was the most observant person I ever knew. She saw every slight, every greedy glance from Carol for 40 years. She never made a scene, but she never forgot. This was her way of protecting you and of giving Carol enough rope to hang herself. And it sounds like the old crow went and bought a brand new noose. Hearing him say it, hearing him validate the wild thought that had bloomed in my own mind was like a key turning in a lock. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't misremembering my mother's intentions. This was a deliberate act. What do I do now? I asked, the question raw. First, he said, his teacher voice taking over, firm and direct. You do not speak to Carol. You do not speak to any of the family who have called on her behalf. Not a word, not a text. You go completely silent. Second, you need a lawyer, not just any lawyer, an estate lawyer, a real shark. I know a guy. His name is David Harrison. He's expensive, but he's worth every penny. He eats people like Carol for breakfast. A lawyer? Isn't that extreme? The idea was daunting. Clara, Robert said gently, Carol didn't just take a ring. She stole from you at your mother's funeral while you were in a state of shock. She did it in front of a room full of people. She has since orchestrated a campaign to make you feel isolated and unstable. This is not a family squabble. This is war, and your mother just handed you the battle plans." His words landed like stones, heavy and true. He was right. This wasn't about a piece of jewelry anymore. It was about my mother's memory. It was about my own sanity. It was about justice. "Okay," I said, a new resolve hardening in my voice. "Give me his number." Mr. Harrison's office was on the top floor of a downtown building with a view of the city that suggested a high hourly rate. The man himself was tall and impeccably dressed, with silver hair and eyes that seemed to miss nothing. He didn't offer fake sympathy. He offered me a comfortable chair and a bottle of water. He listened to my entire story without interruption, his hands steepled on his large mahogany desk. He made a few notes on a yellow legal pad, his pen scratching quietly in the silent room. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and studied me for a long moment. "Your uncle was right," he said finally. "This is not a simple dispute over property. This is a case of intentional infliction of emotional distress and possibly conversion, which is the civil term for theft. The fact that she did this at a funeral, knowing your vulnerable state, is particularly egregious. A judge would not look kindly upon that. But what can we actually do?" I asked. "She has the ring. It's a fake, but she has it. I have nothing. You have a very compelling story," he corrected me gently, "and we have the testimony of the appraiser. First step is to get an affidavit from him, a sworn statement about the nature of the ring and his conversation with your aunt. That corroborates your central claim, that the ring she took is worthless. The next question, the one that will form the core of our case, is this. If the ring Carol has is a replica, where is the real one?" The question hung in the air between us. "I have no idea," I admitted. "I assumed the one she took was the real one. My mother never said anything about a replica. People like your mother, the ones who are quiet but observant, they are often meticulous planners," Mr. Harrison said. "She wouldn't have gone to the trouble of having a replica made without a clear plan for the genuine article. She hid it, somewhere safe, somewhere she knew you would eventually find it, or somewhere she knew Carol would never look." He gave me my first assignment. "I want you to go home and write everything down, every memory you have of your aunt's behavior towards your mother. Anytime she was dismissive or made a grab for property, or showed undue interest in your mother's finances, dates, places, conversations, witnesses if you can remember them. We need to establish a pattern of behavior. This wasn't a one-time impulse. This was the culmination of a long-held resentment." He also told me to start gathering documents, my mother's will, any letters, old emails. He was looking for clues. Leaving his office, I felt a strange sense of lightness. The burden was no longer solely mine. I had an ally, a professional who saw the situation with the same clarity my uncle did. The path forward was going to be difficult, but for the first time, there was a path. That night, I started the journal. It was one of the hardest things I'd ever done. I had to excavate my own memories, digging through years of family gatherings, holidays, and phone calls. I remembered Christmases where Carol would give my mother a backhanded compliment about her decorating, implying it was gaudy. I remembered a summer barbecue where she'd loudly joked about how my mother had landed on her feet by marrying my father, a successful architect, conveniently ignoring my mother's own career as a respected botanist. I found an old email chain where my mother politely but firmly declined to loan Carol a set of antique silver plates, and Carol's passive-aggressive reply about how some people just didn't understand the importance of sharing. Each memory was a small cut, but together they painted a portrait of 1,000 tiny aggressions, a long, slow campaign of psychological warfare waged by my aunt against my mother. And through it all, my mother had remained poised, calm, and resolute. I saw her strength in a new light. It wasn't that she didn't see what Carol was doing, it's that she refused to let it diminish her. She had absorbed the poison for years, and in one final brilliant act, she had found a way to create an antidote. The work was emotionally draining. Some nights I would write for hours, my hand cramping, my eyes burning with unshed tears. The grief was still there, a constant companion, but now it was mingled with a righteous fury. To cope with the emotional fallout, I took another piece of my uncle's advice and found a therapist. Dr. Anya Sharma was a warm, intelligent woman who specialized in trauma and family dynamics. "What you are experiencing is complex grief," she explained in our first session. "You are not only mourning the loss of your mother, but you are also processing a profound betrayal by another family member. The two traumas are intertwined. Your aunt desecrated a sacred space for you, your period of mourning. She helped me understand that my paralysis at the funeral was not weakness, but a common trauma response called freezing. It was my nervous system being overwhelmed by a threat it couldn't process. She gave me tools to manage the anxiety and the waves of anger, breathing exercises, grounding techniques. She encouraged me to keep writing, not just for the legal case, but for myself, to document my own feelings, to give voice to the parts of me that had been silenced. Between Mr. Harrison's strategic guidance, my uncle's unwavering support, and Dr. Sharma's psychological toolkit, I began to build my armor. I was no longer just a grieving daughter. I was a woman preparing for battle. It took 2 weeks for the first shot to be fired. A crisp, formal letter from Harrison and Associates arrived at Carol's manicured suburban home. It was a simple, non-accusatory request for the immediate return of the heirloom sapphire ring belonging to the estate of Eleanor Vance. It gave her a deadline of 5 business days. We knew she wouldn't comply, but it was the necessary first step, a formal demand on the record. Carol didn't wait 5 days. My phone rang less than an hour after the courier service confirmed delivery. Her name flashed on the screen, and my stomach twisted into a knot of pure dread. I remembered Mr. Harrison's instructions. Do not engage. Let everything go to voicemail. We will use her own words against her. I silenced the call and listened to my heart hammer against my ribs. A moment later, the voicemail notification popped up. I took a deep breath and played it. Clara, I cannot believe what you have done. Her voice was no longer smooth and controlled. It was high and tight with fury. Sending a lawyer after me? After all I have done for this family? That ring is mine by right. Your mother promised it to me years ago, and you know it. You are being selfish and vindictive, and you are being manipulated by Robert, who has always been jealous of our side of the family. You are unwell, Clara. Your grief is twisting your mind. Call this ridiculous man off, or you will regret it. I promise you that. I saved the message and immediately forwarded the audio file to Mr. Harrison. His reply was succinct. Excellent. This is exactly what we wanted. She's leading with threats and accusations of mental instability. Textbook. But knowing it was textbook didn't make it any less painful. Her words, though I knew they were lies, were designed to burrow under my skin, to activate my deepest insecurities. The accusation of being unwell was a deliberate, calculated strike. I had struggled with a bout of severe depression in my early 20s after a difficult breakup. My mother had been my rock, getting me into therapy, never once making me feel ashamed. But Carol had always treated it with a kind of smug pity, as evidence of some inherent flaw in my character. Now she was weaponizing it. The next phase of her attack came through the family. The phone started ringing off the hook. First, it was my cousin Sarah, Carol's daughter. Clara, Mom is a wreck, she said, her voice thick with manufactured drama. I don't know what you think happened, but you're tearing this family apart. Over a ring? Mom said she was just holding it for you for safekeeping, and now you're accusing her of theft? You need to apologize. Then came my father's brother, Uncle Frank. He was a passive man, easily swayed by his sister's stronger personality. Clara, your aunt is a pillar of this family. You're making this all so ugly. Can't you just let it go? Think of what your mother would want. The irony was so bitter it made me want to laugh. My mother would want exactly this. She had laid the groundwork for it, but I couldn't say that. I just repeated the same calm, bland script Mr. Harrison had given me. Thank you for your concern, but this is a legal matter now, and I've been advised not to discuss it. This, of course, only fueled the fire, making me sound cold and calculating. The narrative was set. I was the ungrateful, unstable daughter, and Carol was the benevolent matriarch wrongly accused. The most insidious move was the financial pressure. Carol was the co-executor of a trust my father had set up for me. It wasn't a huge amount of money, but it provided a steady income supplement that I relied on to cover my mortgage. Suddenly, there were administrative delays. A required quarterly distribution was missed. When I inquired via email, Carol's reply, CCing her lawyer, was that she had concerns about my current state of mind and financial judgment, and was consulting with legal counsel on the fiduciary responsibilities of the trust. She was trying to starve me out, to make the fight so expensive and so stressful that I would have no choice but to surrender. That was the week I hit rock bottom. The constant phone calls, the accusatory emails, the dwindling bank account, it was a multi-front assault, and my defenses were starting to crumble. One night, after a particularly vicious call from a cousin who called me a greedy little bitch, I finally broke. I slid down the kitchen wall, surrounded by my mother's cookbooks and the lingering scent of her favorite lemon soap, and I sobbed. I sobbed for my mother, for my fractured family, for the exhaustion that went bone deep. The anger was gone, replaced by a vast, empty despair. The thought of just giving up, of calling Mr. Harrison and telling him it was over, was seductive. I just wanted the noise to stop. I wanted peace. My hand trembled as I picked up my phone. For a terrifying second, I thought about calling a number I hadn't dialed in years, the number of a man who could deliver a bottle of oblivion to my doorstep. The urge was a physical craving, an old ghost whispering in my ear that there was an easy way out of the pain. My sobriety, which I had guarded so fiercely for 5 years, suddenly felt fragile, like a thin sheet of glass. Instead, I called my sponsor, a woman named Maria who had seen me through my darkest days. Her voice was calm and steady as I choked out the story. She didn't offer advice or platitudes, she just listened. When I was done, she said, "They are trying to make you into the person they are telling everyone you are, an unstable, unreliable addict. They want you to relapse. It would be the perfect validation for their story. Do not give them that satisfaction. Your sobriety is the one thing that is completely yours. Don't let them take that too." Her words cut through the fog of despair. She was right. This wasn't just about a ring or an inheritance. It was about my identity. Carol wasn't just trying to discredit me. She was trying to destroy me, to push me back into the sickness I had fought so hard to escape. Picking up a drink wouldn't be a surrender. It would be the ultimate victory for her. A cold resolve settled over me. I would not let her win. I would not let her take anything else from me. The next morning, I called Mr. Harrison. "She's not backing down," I said. "So what's our next move?" "Good," he said, and I could hear the satisfaction in his voice. "Her aggression is our advantage. Now we dig." His plan was methodical. We had established Carol's motive and her pattern of behavior. We had her on record making threats and admissions of intent. Now, we needed the smoking gun. We needed the real ring. "Your mother was a botanist," he said during our next meeting, pacing in front of his large office window. "A scientist. She was precise, logical. She wouldn't have hidden something so valuable in a sentimental place like a jewelry box or the back of a drawer. That's the first place a thief would look. She would have put it somewhere secure, somewhere official. We started with the banks. We compiled a list of every bank my mother had had ever used, going back decades. It was a tedious process. We sent formal inquiries to each one, armed with my authority as the executor of her will, asking if she had a safe deposit box. For weeks, the replies came back negative. My hope began to wane. Maybe she had sold it. Maybe she'd given it to someone else entirely. Maybe I had misinterpreted everything. Then, we got a hit. It was from a small independent bank in a town 30 miles away, a place my mother had no obvious connection to. The branch manager confirmed that an Eleanor Vance had maintained a box there for the past 15 years. The payments were auto-drafted from a small savings account I hadn't even known she had. It was a ghost account, set up for this single purpose. My heart hammered in my chest. This was it. I knew it. Getting into the box was another legal hurdle. Because I wasn't listed on the account, we needed a specific court order. Carol's lawyer fought it, of course, claiming it was an unnecessary and invasive fishing expedition into the deceased's private affairs. The judge, a no-nonsense woman who looked thoroughly unimpressed with their arguments, granted our motion in less than 10 minutes. A week later, I found myself standing in a sterile, windowless vault with Mr. Harrison and a bank employee. The employee used his key. I used the key that had been found in a sealed envelope in my mother's desk drawer marked, "For Clara when you need it," and the small metal door swung open. The employee slid out a long, thin box and placed it on the table in the private viewing room. He then discreetly left, closing the door behind him. My hands were shaking as I lifted the lid. Inside, there wasn't much. A few stock certificates, my birth certificate, and a small dark blue velvet pouch tied with a silk cord. It was heavy, much heavier than it should have been. I looked at Mr. Harrison. He nodded, his expression unreadable. I slowly untied the cord and tipped the contents into my palm. The ring that fell into my hand was breathtaking. It was the ring from my memory, but 1,000 times more vibrant. The sapphire was a deep velvety blue, like a twilight sky, and the diamonds surrounding it glittered with an inner fire, casting tiny rainbows on the sterile white walls of the room. It felt cold and solid and real. It pulsed with a quiet energy. This was my great-grandmother's ring. This was my mother's love. Tears welled in my eyes as I slid it onto my finger. It fit perfectly, but there was something else in the box. A thick cream-colored envelope with my name written on the front in my mother's elegant looping script. I picked it up, my thumb tracing her name. I opened the unsealed flap and pulled out several folded pages. "My dearest daughter," the letter began. "If you are reading this, it means two things. First, that I am gone, for which I am sorry. And second, that Carol has behaved exactly as I feared she would. I hope that finding this letter brings you not more sadness, but a sense of peace, and perhaps even a little bit of righteous satisfaction." I had to stop and take a breath, pressing my knuckles to my mouth. Mr. Harrison remained silent, giving me the space I needed. I continued reading. My mother's voice was so clear in the written words, it was as if she were in the room with me. She explained everything. "I have known your aunt for a very long time," she wrote. "I know her heart, and I know the jealousy that has eaten away at her for 40 years. It began when your father chose me, and it has never stopped. She sees possessions not as things of beauty or sentiment, but as trophies, as proof of her status, and she has always coveted this ring above all else." She went on to detail a long history of Carol's transgressions, things she had never spoken of to me, an expensive brooch that went missing after a family visit, a series of loans to Carol's husband that were never repaid, attempts to have herself named as a beneficiary on my mother's life insurance. It was a chilling, methodical account of decades of emotional and financial predation. "About 15 years ago," the letter continued, "after she tried to convince your ailing grandmother to change her will and leave her this very ring, I knew I had to act. I couldn't bear the thought of it falling into her hands, or of her harassing you for it after I was gone. So I had a replica made, a very, very good one. I commissioned it from a craftsman in the city. It was my insurance policy. I wore the replica to most family functions, keeping the real one safe. The one I gave you on my last day, my love, was the replica. I am so sorry for that small deception, but I hope you understand why. I could not risk her taking the real one from you in a moment of weakness or grief." I looked at the real ring, now glittering on my finger, and then back at the letter. It was an act of incredible foresight, of fierce, protective love. She had armed me for a battle she knew I would have to fight. "I know Carol," she concluded. "Her greed and her ego are boundless. She will not be able to resist showing off her prize. She will take it to be appraised, and her pride will be her downfall. Let her show the world who she really is. Do not be afraid of the ugliness she will create. You come from a line of strong women. Your strength is not in your loudness, but in your quietness, your observation, your resolve. Use it. Honor our family, not by keeping a false peace, but by standing for the truth. I love you more than words can say. Be happy, Mom." I folded the letter, my tears now falling freely onto the pages. They were not tears of sadness, but of overwhelming gratitude and love. My mother hadn't just left me a ring. She had left me a roadmap. She had left me her strength. I looked up at Mr. Harrison, my eyes clear. "Now we have her," I said. The climax did not come in a grand courtroom. The wheels of justice, I was learning, often turned in much quieter, more mundane settings. In our case, it was a deposition, held in a soulless conference room at a neutral law firm. The long, polished table reflected the grim faces of everyone present, me and Mr. Harrison on one side, Carol and her increasingly weary-looking lawyer, Mr. Schmidt, on the other. A court stenographer sat at the end of the table, her fingers poised over her machine. The air was thick with tension. Carol refused to look at me, staring straight ahead with an expression of monumental boredom, as if the entire proceeding was a tedious imposition. Mr. Harrison began the questioning calmly, methodically. He had me recount the events of the funeral. I spoke clearly, sticking to the facts, just as we had rehearsed. I described Carol approaching me, her words, the physical act of her pulling the ring from my finger. When it was Mr. Schmidt's turn to question me, he tried to rattle me. He was smarmy and condescending. Miss Vance, you admit you were in a state of extreme emotional distress at the time, correct? I was grieving the death of my mother, yes. So your memory of events might not be entirely reliable. My memory of that event is crystal clear, I said, my voice even. I used a grounding technique Dr. Sharma had taught me, focusing on the feeling of my feet flat on the floor, the solid weight of the chair beneath me. He moved on, trying to paint me as unstable, bringing up my past struggles with depression. You have a history of emotional issues, do you not? I sought and received treatment for depression 10 years ago, I said, looking him directly in the eye, refusing to be shamed. It has no bearing on the events of last month. After a grueling hour, it was Carol's turn. Mr. Harrison began gently, establishing the basic facts. He had her confirm that she took the ring from my finger at the funeral. I was securing a family heirloom, she said, her voice dripping with self-righteousness. Clara was not in a fit state to be responsible for it. He then introduced the affidavit from the appraiser, Mr. Miller. He read aloud the description of the ring Carol had brought him. Glass, cubic zirconia, sterling silver. Is this the ring you took from your niece, Miss Vance? Carol's face tightened. That man is an incompetent fool. It was a mistake. So it is your testimony that the family heirloom, a priceless sapphire, was misidentified by a certified gemologist as glass? Obviously, she snapped. Mr. Harrison paused, letting her arrogance hang in the air. Then he placed a small velvet pouch on the table, the same one from the safe deposit box. Mr. Schmidt, he said, I believe we provided you with a copy of a letter found with this item. Mr. Schmidt paled slightly and shuffled some papers. We object to the introduction of this document. Its authenticity cannot be verified. It has been verified by 3 separate handwriting experts, as you well know. Mr. Harrison countered smoothly. I would now like to read a portion of this letter, written by the late Eleanor Vance, into the record. As he began to read my mother's words, the color drained from Carol's face. Her mask of bored indifference cracked. He read the parts about Carol's jealousy, her history of greed, and the deliberate plan to create a replica. With every word, Carol's composure frayed. Her knuckles were white where she gripped the edge of the table. When he finished reading, a profound silence filled the room. Mr. Harrison then slowly untied the pouch and let the real ring roll out onto the polished table. It seemed to absorb all the light in the room, its blue fire a stark contrast to the drab surroundings. This ring, Mr. Harrison said, his voice quiet but carrying immense weight, was recovered from a safe deposit box maintained by Eleanor Vance. It has been appraised at a value of over $200,000. This, Miss Vance, is the real family heirloom. That was when she finally broke. It wasn't a confession born of remorse. It was a volcanic eruption of narcissistic rage. Her lawyer put a hand on her arm, but she shook it off, rising slightly from her chair. That witch, she hissed, her voice a venomous screech that made the stenographer jump. She always thought she was better than me. Her and her whole smug family, looking down on us. I took care of my brother, her husband, when he was sick. I organized his funeral. I held this family together. I deserved something for that. She promised me that ring. Years ago, she said it would be mine. Is there any proof of that promise, Miss Vance? Mr. Harrison asked calmly. A letter? A witness? Proof. I don't need proof. I know what she said, she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me. And you were always a spoiled, ungrateful child. You never appreciated anything she gave you. You didn't deserve her, and you certainly don't deserve that ring. It should be mine. It is mine by right. She was panting, her face flushed a blotchy red. She had, in the space of 30 seconds, admitted her motive, her sense of entitlement, and her deep-seated hatred for my mother. She had confessed to everything that mattered. Her lawyer, Mr. Schmidt, looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. He was staring at his client with an expression of pure horror. He knew, as we all did, that the case was over. He had just watched his client immolate herself on a funeral pyre of her own making. Mr. Harrison looked at the stenographer. Please ensure that last statement is transcribed verbatim, he said, his voice utterly serene. Then he looked at me and gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. We had won. The aftermath was swift and decisive. Faced with the transcript of Carol's deposition, a document that read like the monologue of a theatrical villain, her lawyer immediately advised her to settle. There would be no public court case, no trial. It was all handled through a series of terse legal agreements. Carol was forced to sign a document relinquishing any and all claim to the ring and to any other personal property from my mother's estate. She was compelled to pay my entire legal bill, a figure that made me gasp when I saw it. And, perhaps most satisfyingly, Mr. Harrison used the deposition as leverage to have her immediately removed as co-executor from my father's trust, citing her demonstrated animosity towards me, the beneficiary, as a gross conflict of interest. Her control over my finances was severed permanently. I felt a profound sense of relief, but not the triumphant joy I had expected. There was a hollowness to the victory. I had the ring. I had my financial independence. I had been legally vindicated, but the process had cost me what was left of my father's side of the family. The lines had been drawn, and they had chosen their side. The ugliness my mother had warned me about had come to pass, and it had left deep, ragged scars. In a session with Dr. Sharma, I struggled to articulate this feeling. I won, I told her, turning the heavy, beautiful ring on my finger. But it feels like I just survived a fire. I'm safe, but the house is gone, and I'm just standing in the ashes. That is the nature of this kind of victory, she said gently. Justice and healing are not the same thing. The legal system can provide accountability, but it can't mend relationships or erase the harm that was done. You've won the battle, Clara. Now the work of rebuilding your life begins. And that's what I started to do, piece by piece. The first step was establishing permanent, non-negotiable boundaries. I drafted a short, simple email. It went out to Carol, to her children, and to the collection of aunts and cousins who had called to pressure and harass me. Due to the recent conflict, I wrote, I have made the difficult decision to take a significant and indefinite period of space. I will not be reachable by phone or email. I wish you all the best. I didn't accuse. I didn't explain. I simply closed the door. Then I blocked their numbers, their email addresses, and their social media profiles. The ensuing silence was the most peaceful sound I had ever heard. I sold my mother's house. It was too big for me, too full of ghosts, both good and bad. I used the proceeds, along with the now unfettered income from my father's trust, to buy a small, light-filled condo in a different part of the city, a place that was entirely my own, with no history, no memories attached. I filled it with plants, a nod to my mother's passion, and with art that I loved. I continued my therapy. I went to my sobriety meetings. I reconnected with old friends who had known nothing of the family drama, and their easy, uncomplicated company was a balm. Slowly, life began to feel normal again, or rather, a new kind of normal, a quieter, more deliberate existence. The trauma of the betrayal hadn't vanished. I knew it would always be a part of my story, a dark thread woven into the tapestry, but it no longer defined me. It was a chapter, not the whole book. Months later, on a quiet Sunday evening, I was sitting by my new window, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. I had been cleaning out a box of old papers and came across the letter my mother had written, the one we found in the safe deposit box. I read it again, her words a familiar comfort. Your strength is not in your loudness, but in your quietness, your observation, your resolve. I looked down at my hand, at the deep blue sapphire nestled there. For so long, it had been a symbol of conflict, of loss and betrayal and a grueling fight. But now, sitting in the quiet of my new life, a life I had fought for and built for myself, it felt different. It was no longer just a ring. It was a testament to a mother's fierce, protective love, to her incredible foresight, and to the resilience she had passed down to me. It was a reminder that I had faced down the vulture and had not been devoured. I had survived, and I was free. I slipped the ring off my finger, holding the cool, heavy weight of it in my palm, and for the first time I smiled. The peace was real. It was mine.